right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Helping Kids Thrive Wellness series from Kids in Crisis. My name is Denise Qualey, and I'm the Managing Director. And just a little bit, a brief thing about Kids in Crisis is Kids in Crisis is a 24/7 emergency shelter and crisis intervention program for children newborn to 17. And I encourage you all to go to our website and check out all the services and resources there. Today's program will be recorded, and you can find that recording along with the other webinars we've done on that website. So today's discussion for our panel is a discussion about managing anxiety while supporting our LGBTQ plus youth. And the response has been great. I think it's been obviously a much sought after discussion. But first I want to introduce our panel, and I'll let them introduce themselves, Polly, Liz, and Phoebe. And why don't we start with you, Liz?
Hi, my name is Liz Semenyck. My pronouns are she, hers, and I am a clinician at Triangle Community Center in Norwalk and also CT Affirmative Therapy in Sandy Hook. I am a marriage and family therapist, and I specialize in LGBTQ youth and adolescents, particularly those with gender dysphoria and suicidal ideation.
Thank you. Phoebe?
Hi, everybody. My name is Phoebe Oler, and I'm the Lighthouse Program Manager with Kids in Crisis. I have a master's degree in divinity from Yale Divinity School, and I have a degree in anthropology from Boston University.
Thank you. And Polly?
Hi, I'm Polly O'Brien Morrow, and I have two amazing children, both of whom are gay and transgender. 18-year-old Cass has identified as non-binary since 2021, and 15-year-old Alex, who was assigned female at birth, let us know that he was transgender just shy of his 12th birthday in 2019. So I've learned a lot since then. I'm really passionate about supporting other families and advancing LGBTQ plus causes. I serve as development co-chair on the board of Stamford Pride, and I'm an active supporter of Kids in Crisis Lighthouse program, and I serve on Kids in Crisis Advisory Council. And I also helped form Stamford Pride's Family Alliance and a new PFLAG chapter in Stamford to support family and friends of the community.
Thank you, Polly. And I just want to say we did have another panelist, Jennifer Russell, who's a clinician at Growth Therapy, who came down with an illness, so she cannot join us this morning. But I welcome everybody else. And I'm just getting notification that we might be having trouble with our chat box or the Q&A. So what I would say is that I am the only one that can see the Q&A, the questions, so our guests can plug in questions as soon as that's working. I would suggest trying both chat and Q&A to put your questions in, and I'll try to feed them to the panel throughout our discussion. But let's start us off with a few questions that we had people write in and we have generated among ourselves about this topic. So how do you feel, and think about your own situation, how did you feel when your child was coming out? How was that for any of you?
I think I'm the only one that is the parent of an LGBTQ child at this point. So I'd say there was just a huge range of emotions when my youngest came out. I felt a little bit foolish, like in hindsight, of course he was transgender. Why didn't we listen to our gut instead of the psychologist that our child had been working with? A wonderful psychologist, but one that clearly didn't have any training or expertise in LGBTQ issues and didn't think we needed to worry about that. I also felt very relieved. It explained a lot, and hopefully with the right support, we wanted to make sure our child understood that they weren't broken and that they weren't alone. We were excited that by coming out, we could finally resolve or at least reduce a lot of the anxiety and panic attacks that he had been suffering from. I was also afraid. I didn't know anybody else who had been down this path before. particularly transgender. I had friends that were gay and friends with kids that were gay, but no one in my life was transgender. I was determined to try and find the right resources quickly to help put our son's puberty on a pause so he could get the counseling that he needed and medical care that he would need. And I was really grateful and relieved that we live in a time and in a place in Connecticut where there's so much greater understanding and, you know, in a part of the country that isn't as backwards as we're seeing in other parts of the US. And so lots and lots of emotions to process.
That's a lot for, absolutely, for everyone in the family, because it affects everybody. Liz, you work with families that are going through this as well. Any thoughts about that?
Yeah, it's a very different experience for every family, you know, but most of the supportive families that I see have very similar experiences to Qualey, where it's just a wide range of emotions, and sometimes they change depending on the day. And part of what I do as a family therapist is I work with the family as a whole, and then I'll do parenting sessions, even with just maybe one of the parents. If maybe one of the parents is perhaps suffering the loss of the identified assigned gender at birth. Sometimes some parents that's a hard adjustment for, and it's valid, but we also have to deal with meeting people where they're at. So I make sure to do that very separately with the parents so that the kids aren't exposed to any potential negative statements or anything. And then of course I give most, at least adolescents, they don't really enjoy talking about gender dysphoria with their parents. So I get those talks too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. Good to have a professional guidance. That's great. And just to put out there, I think in terms of approaching a young person that you suspect may be LGBTQ plus, but is not coming out, but you want to demonstrate that you're supportive, that you'd be open to hearing these things. How would you help people navigate that? You have this feeling, but the young person in your life isn't sharing anything.
Well, I would say that I'm personally not one that would approach somebody directly. I know there's really no way to tell and wouldn't want to be mistaken about somebody's gender identity or their sexuality. But I really try to make it a point to let people know that I'm a safe person to approach through visible things like the pride flag on our house, the rainbow artwork behind me on my Zoom meetings, and my proud mom and ally sign that's in my home office that everyone sees on my calls. And then I wear a lot of accessories or jewelry like safety pin jewelry, rainbow scarves, and bracelets when I'm out. I'm also a huge fan of t-shirts with hearts and rainbows and supportive sayings like love is love, and I get compliments on them all the time. And you know, I make it a point, my family is comfortable with us sharing, you know, publicly our journey, and I talk about my volunteer work with Kids in Crisis and Stamford Pride and PFLAG. And so people will often approach me, but I really don't want to make anybody uncomfortable by approaching them. I like them to come to me first and know that I'm a safe person to talk to.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'd like to touch on the previous question and this question together, that coming out is not a one-time thing. Coming out is a constant thing, whether it's to yourself, to others, whether your gender is changing and your sexuality is changing as you develop or have different experiences. And something I've seen with the youth that I'm working with is that there is a tension where they want to be seen and understood as truly trans or truly gay or whatever their identity is. And so they want to be very assertive in it, but they also really still need that space to say, I'm not certain about everything. I'm still young, and that doesn't mean I'm not trans. It just means I don't maybe know exactly how that expresses itself yet, or in a year it expresses itself slightly differently. And so to touch on the second question, you know, a child could come out as trans, and then still need space and the knowledge that the adults in their lives are okay with them coming out as expressing themselves in a way that maybe seems like it counteracts that identity, but yeah. So like a trans masculine person might end up wearing earrings, and that's okay.
Yeah, and just to piggyback off both Phoebe and Polly, you really don't approach anyone. It's just not, it's not a situation I would ever want to be in, but I have learned, you know, slap a sticker on, usually I have stuff, I switched offices, so I usually have a big flag in the back, but just even a sticker, a hair tie, a bracelet, something that's rainbowy or trans flaggy, so that they see it and they know, and then they know they're safe, and then you can start the conversation. But it's not really something you ever want to really initiate. It's not really fair.
Absolutely, let it happen. You know, when I think about the risk factors for LGBTQ plus kids and young people, about suicide ideation, self-harming, bullying, and all these things, that safety comes to the mind of a lot of parents. When you are being out there and promoting and wanting to be supportive, it lets people know where you stand. What are your thoughts about and concerns about, and do you have conversations with your kids about safety?
Yeah, I think as a parent, I'm probably going to jump in and go first, and you can all
Yeah, go,
but,
please.
you know, it was certainly one of my biggest fears, you know, will my child be judged? Will they be at risk? I do know, you know, we did have our kids take personal safety and self-defense classes and remind them how important it is to be aware of their surroundings and to, you know, call for help, you know, go to a responsible adult if they feel unsafe or uncomfortable. I also, both of my kids did self-harm at one point. And when I noticed that my youngest was self-harming the first time, it was very light, linear scratches on their forearm, that he tried to explain that the cat did it. And I'm like, clearly the cats are not that neat. And I told him that it was really okay if he had self-harm, but that we wanted to work with him to understand why he did it and help him learn other better coping mechanisms that could help him through tough times and emotions. My son also, when he was in middle school, there was a time when he really liked to walk home from school, and he was hit by an adult male who, while he was walking home from school one day, and while he was really reluctant to report it, he shared with a teacher at school that it had happened, and then he let me know that it happened, and I let him know that it was really important to file a police report so that hopefully, you know, this wouldn't happen to somebody else, or there would be a trail in case this person, you know, had a pattern of this. So, you know, my son was ambivalent about the police in general, but I knew that the police department had an LGBTQ liaison that he could speak with, and we were so blessed. The officer actually offered to come to the house. This was during COVID time, so we were, you know, anxious about multiple levels, but he came to the house and sat outside and spoke to my son and took his statement, and could not have been more supportive. And I think it was a breakthrough, you know, for my son, that, you know, the police are there to help. And then my son also was the recipient of a really hateful comment in middle school from another student who I'm sure was mimicking something they heard at home. And we talked to him about the need to let the principal know. And the principal was awesome and handled things very well with the student who had, you know, affronted him. And, you know, I think that the kid was so apologetic and I'm sorry, and learned that that was not appropriate. And Alex still goes to school with that kid, and they have a pretty good relationship. So it's like just helping him to advocate for himself, or if he needs a little help, going with him to talk to somebody or making an introduction, to the principal or somebody saying, my son has something he really needs to talk about. Could you, and giving them some insights. As long as Alex was comfortable with that, we would, help him to make that conversation happen.
Oh, wow. Good. What a good ending to that interaction with that student, that you can come away and have that, difference of opinion or meanness and work through it.
Yeah. I mean, and there are things like the school bus situation is still really uncomfortable for Alex. His high school shares buses, with the middle school students, and kids can be really, difficult. So we minimize his need to, expose himself to that. My husband drops him off at school on his way to work, and I will pick him up at the end of the day. It's kind of like, you don't need to put yourself out there and deal with that all the time. And we're blessed that we can help him avoid some of it, but he does know how to deal with it if it happens.
That's really good. That's really good. Liz or Phoebe, any thoughts about clients and young people you work with that are navigating being in that kind of arena of maybe being vulnerable?
I thought you were going to go, Phoebe. Sorry. Go ahead.
I just wanted to touch on digital relationships and the safety concern there, and what makes me anxious about this population of youth is that if they can't find people like them in person around them, they're going to go to the internet. And so what I encourage is seeking out real in-person relationships as best as possible to try to mitigate that risk.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. I think that's part of why TCC, Triangle Community Center, is so important to the population, because it offers a safe space for children, for adolescents, for adults, all ages. And it's really a place where you can come present however you feel. We have a variety of meetings. We host 2 monthly dinners. There's an adult dinner that's great for connecting LGBTQ adults. And then I am taking over the youth dinner, which is really important for the kids, because having a safe LGBTQ space for kids is really hard to come by, to ensure that nothing foul will happen. You know what I mean? Everyone has the right intentions and is able to support. It's important. I also, safety plans are a big part of therapy. We go over different coping skills. I always try to normalize intrusive thoughts and suicidal ideation, because it is something that people do experience, and they are very scary to have. And I always sort of frame it where we have these thoughts and it's okay. We don't act on them, but it's just they're telling us that we need help. I need to tell mom or dad, and mom and dad needs to call in a professional. And much like Qualey was saying, there are a lot of providers out there that aren't necessarily affirmative, or at least knowledgeable at being affirmative. So that sort of, by the time some families get to me, that I'm like the 3rd therapist, and they're really defeated and exhausted. But I have to say, the center itself and just being an affirmative therapist, really, I think, comforts people.
We have an extensive list of resources everyone registered for the webinar will get about providers, groups, books, a lot of different resources you'll get. But I'm wondering, based on, Liz, what you just shared, and Polly, all the help and you've gotten for your kids and what Phoebe does, what would be some of the key indicators that you would want parents to look for about when it's time to get professional help?
Well, I'm a big fan of mental health care, and I think that everybody needs to have somebody to talk to, ideally somebody who's trained to help them process things. I think LGBTQ plus kids, particularly transgender kids, are dealing with so much stress and societal angst that professional help is, it was, for my family, it wasn't optional. And learning to understand your emotions and what triggers them, and being able to talk with someone that, you know, and build a relationship with a skilled counselor who knows your experiences, it's really a life skill that builds resiliency. And so I highly recommend it. And there are wonderful nonprofit organizations that can help, you know, like Triangle Community Center, which is where we found our first, our only counselor, really. We've been with her for 4 or 5 years now. So anyway, beyond that, you know, when your child is clearly struggling or suffering due to depression or anxiety, my son's anxiety was absolutely crippling at times. They may need more support. So finding a pediatric psychiatrist that your child can relate to can be a godsend to help them through it. I highly recommend getting care when your kids are stressed. And being a kid is just stressful, but particularly for gay and LGBTQ kids.
Yeah. Any other signs or indicators?
I usually tell parents, anytime you see a change in behavior, that's it doesn't ever hurt to just call any therapist and just say, hey, I'm noticing this. What do you think? If we're talking LGBTQ, you know, it could be the most subtlest signs that kids are sending, and parents might be blind to them for whatever reason. But typically you'll see it with especially smaller kids, well, no, teenagers too. You know, like for Easter parties, holiday parties, graduations, religious things, you know, when you're expected to dress up. And parents a lot of times just because they're used to it, seeing their kid in a dress or a suit, depending on their assigned gender, and then the fight about the suit or the bathing suits. So usually formal wear, fights about formal wear and swimsuits are a pretty good red flag that there's some gender dysphoria going on.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I have a question here from the audience, from a clinician, about any tips on how to support a transgender youth who's not out at home and family is very unsupportive of that. They have the and they're not connected with groups or online things.
Well, I think, you know, the availability of groups like the support groups through Triangle Community Center and PFLAG, you know, like somehow making parents aware that these groups exist and can be a resource for them. Not sure in the right circumstances what the best way of making that happen is, but you don't want to out somebody to their parents. That's, you know, as I said, it's a personal journey, and to help the kid become comfortable. I don't know. I'm really not sure. I'm going to defer that more to Liz and Phoebe.
Mm.
Phoebe, I'll let you talk.
Phoebe, any ones that come to our groups and kids that you see that are not out at home and don't feel supported?
My suggestion is that you encourage the online groups, because that would be the most accessible option. And although the child might not see a way to do that now, like maybe they don't have a personal device, they don't have access to the internet in that way in a private space at home right now, but I would continue to encourage the digital group as in case anything ever changes in their accessibility to it. And given that that's the lowest, that's the easiest one to attend, then getting dropped off somewhere, that would be my suggestion.
How do you vet out? How do you vet out? It is tricky. How do you vet out those online things so you don't get caught in something that's negative, or maybe someone that's not there for the best reasons? You see a lot of kids, you hear in the news, kids that have been really bullied and tortured online.
Yeah, you want to make sure that you're like with Phoebe in a program, not necessarily Phoebe, but like the Lighthouse you want to make sure you're in an organization that is backed by being affirmative. You don't want to just join necessarily any group. We're seeing a lot of YouTube and TikTok, Patreon stuff going on, which is scaring parents also. And I think that little helps bridge parents bringing kids to in-person groups. So even if they don't support, they at least want their child to be safe and not, whatever, in trouble. So that's usually how I can get them to get like an in-person relationship going for groups. I also, the schools are, even elementary schools are implementing gender affirming or affirmative clinicians, I should say. And school social workers and psychologists are getting trained too, so they have the proper language. School nurses. There's always GSA at the school too. Hopefully they can, any student can start one, they just need a teacher to ask. And it is illegal if the teacher says no. So knowing your laws, knowing your rights, knowing your area, and I mean, I think the bread and butter of LGBTQ spectrum, if you will, is backed on like relationships. You know what I mean? Like your found family, your like those who support you. Those who have seen you at your worst and helped you get to your best. It's really important.
That is there any one online, someone's asking, is there one like go-to has kind of the Good Housekeeping seal of an online supportive service or group or chat room for young people?
CCC has a variety of groups on the website.
Yeah, I joined Serendipity Doodah. It's a group that I heard about. Like we watched what's the name of the show, the Canada show, the Schitt's Creek show, which and when they had their last show, following that, there was a letter that they read from somebody at the Serendipity Doodah Facebook group, and so I joined that. There are other ones that I joined, and I think I put them in the resource list, but that's been a great resource for me to, post questions or situations and get feedback on. It's not to say that all the feedback you're going to get on it is going to be qualified and great, but at least it gives you a series of perspectives to weigh on your own. And my kids' counselor is a tremendous resource for me, and the psychiatrist, but talking with other parents through PFLAG, which is a fantastic resource. Sorry, there's some noise in my house. I got to shut this door again. I think finding other parents is really helpful, or, and kids do they find friends at school that get them. But we're hugely grateful for the Lighthouse program. That was one of the first resources we found where Alex really felt like he had other people like him. And so it's a fantastic resource. Highly recommend it.
That's
on the
great.
On the list we will send out to everybody, there will be a section with groups, and there will be options in those links for virtual ones that we believe this team of people are vetted and professional and well run. So I would use that resource list.
Yeah, usually if you can see that the group leader is a provider of some sort, LCSW, LMFT, LPCA, LBC, I mean, that is hopeful because they're a trained mental health professional. But also, I heard one mom say, finding a therapist is like finding the right pair of jeans. You got to try on a couple different tries to get the right one sometimes. And I think the same goes for groups. You know what I mean? You may find yourself, just because you go and maybe like if you don't feel comfortable, you don't have to stay and you don't have to go back. You know what I mean? You could just find a different one.
Yeah, finding the comfort and the right fit. Someone was mentioning in the chat that some schools don't always have the LGBTQ plus services like Catholic schools. and there, you might have to seek things out
Mhm.
elsewhere.
Yep.
A very, I think, a common question you hear and someone's asking as well is, what's the best way to approach someone about what their pronouns are? How would they like to be addressed? With just the most supportive way, the way that would make someone know that you're doing it for the right reasons.
Well, I always like to post my pronouns, and we do have pronoun buttons that we wear out to larger events. Otherwise, it's just a simple, what are your, my name is Polly. I use she, her. Like if you first put yours out there, then people tend to be comfortable saying theirs. And otherwise, you can just ask in a nice way, what are your pronouns? And usually people are happy to be asked.
Mhm. Yeah, same thing. I usually say, can I ask your pronouns? Because
Oh, okay.
some people don't like pronouns. So
Interesting.
I learned the hard way.
That's good
But,
advice.
yeah.
That's great. So someone just added another resource, if it's not on our list, Centerlink. It's a national resource that if some for a group and online support. That's another one. Phoebe, did you want to say something about pronouns and talking? Because it comes up probably in groups.
Yeah, I just wanted to reiterate what Polly and Liz already said, that asking is fine. It's always better to put your pronouns out there first, and to not, if you look traditionally feminine, not to, it's still important that you say my pronouns are she, her, and yeah.
Mm-hmm. Someone mentioned a question earlier about some terminology in terms of, and I'm just looking for my notes about it. It is sexual gender minority, and it's a term that's being used. Do you all, are you familiar with it? Do you think, why can't it just be LGBTQ plus? Why are these other terms coming up in place of plus, LGBTQ plus?
Well, I had not heard of the term until you mentioned it before the call started. I think that anything that makes people feel diminished or smaller or other is less than ideal. We call minority groups minorities when they're actually the majority now. And I think everybody is somewhere on a continuum of gender and sexuality. And, how can anybody be a minority? It's just my thought. I think LGBTQ is more encompassing and doesn't have any negative aspect to it.
Yeah. I've only really heard the term, that term in academics, like academically, for some of the classes I took to specialize in queer youth, or people, I should say. So outside of that, I really haven't. And I actually think that they might have changed the name of the program to say LGBTQ instead of gender and sexual minority. But I think it's just maybe more of a clinical academic thing than PC, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Okay. It kind of tag teams with a comment someone made is, if you're trying to navigate college prep and think about where your child's going to go after high school, is there any guidance or tips you have on how to find an LGBTQ plus supportive, positive college environment? Are there schools out there that are better than others for that?
I think, my oldest is a senior in high school right now and actually made their decision on college over this weekend, but that they're like Princeton Review and other guidebooks about colleges will, they have a ranking, some that are better than others, quote unquote. But, I have a nephew who's gay who went to school in the South, and we were all a little worried about, North Carolina. And even though there might be some areas of the state that are less desirable than others. I think almost every college campus, every smart one anyway, is like a protective bubble, and they have LGBTQ support groups. And so I think, pursuing schools that have the study area that you're and then checking them out and seeing. But when my child is going to go to London for the next 3 years of college, which was kind of scary, but we went to this school this weekend. They had gender neutral bathrooms. They had, no gendered bathrooms anywhere on this campus. And, I just think it's the way that schools are evolving to meet the needs of the population they're trying to attract to their school. So and my nephew who went to North Carolina had a fantastic experience down there. So I don't think there are any good schools that aren't supportive.
I was on a panel with a college admission advisor from a private school, and she said to the audience, just whatever you have in your background of colleges and your thinking of what it was like when, from a parent's perspective, when you were young, this was the school, this was the school's reputation. Go back and visit, rethink it. Schools have changed. They're more diverse than they were. Things are different. So I appreciate that, Polly, doing your homework and figuring out and visiting.
Yeah, I would definitely say visiting, just in general, any child, it's, if you can. I also think, making sure most campuses are going the no gender bathroom route, all gender, no gender. And that I even saw it at Fairfield U. So that's great. I also think, depending on your identity, the dorm situation, if you're going to be an on-campus student, you really want to make sure that they have safe dorming,
Absolutely. Just to go back to something we discussed earlier, just any tips that we might have missed for families that may have experienced or heard about their child being mistreated or judged by people, and how to navigate that. Leaping in to help, that protective bear, helping them to advocate for themselves. There's so many ways to go about this. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think, my first impulse, because I'm an analytical person, was just to capture resources and find books and find, we talked to our minister at church, which was amazing. There's so much support out there, but there is, to your point, there can be people that are very difficult and not accepting. And depending on how important those people are in your life to you, you make the effort to try and help them understand. And I'm sure your counselor may have ideas and ways to do that, but at some point also you may have to lose some connections to people that can't find a way to be supportive. Your child does not have a choice about who they are. They are who they are. And yes, there may be some fluidity and it may evolve over time, but every kid needs support from everybody in their life. Nobody needs to be having people that are critical of them or dismissing this really important part of who they are. So I think that's a difficult thing to maneuver, but your child needs to have your support. And that sometimes is protecting them from people that are not supportive.
And that's hard to do. It's one thing when it's a coach or in the school arena, but what happens when it's at a family gathering?
Yeah.
Or a social, event that is outside. Any thoughts on that, navigating?
Yeah, none of my clients I don't think I've experienced that yet. I say yet. But I think most kids who have figured out they're queer in some way, they have that sort of little instinct to, like, I'm just stick to this wall over here, or they sort of, it's sad because it's learned, but it's a way for them protect themselves, you know what I mean? So you'll see people maybe hesitate to say like their pronouns, or they may like there's even certain times I don't say I'm an affirmative therapist just because I don't know who I'm talking to, you know what I mean? And I don't want to go down that rabbit hole. So you'll see that with kids too. And I always try to say, meet them where they're at, you know, so if you can intervene for them, you know, or show them how to intervene, that's obviously the best. But sometimes if you have to get involved with the administration at school, you know what I mean? If it is a coach through the school, it's really either just removing yourself from the situation to keep yourself safe, or making someone else aware of it, you know, getting help.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, you know, in terms of supporting parents in navigating this as well, would you recommend a support group or therapy for the parents of
Yes.
LGBTQ?
Always. Yeah. And PFLAG.
PFLAG. Absolutely.
That was such an important thing for me to connect with other parents of LGBTQ kids. I mentioned earlier, Circle Care Center had or still has a queer and questioning youth session, and I met some parents through that. Like the parents would loosely meet while they drove their kids to come to the session. And then I attended PFLAG meetings in Norwalk for a bit, but the timing of it wasn't great for me. And that's part of the reason why we have formed the Stamford Pride Family Alliance, and which has now become a PFLAG chapter. PFLAG does provide incredible resources for parents, and parents can know they can join a chapter, or they can just join PFLAG National and find hosts of information on their website as well. But I think there's really something great about having peers to talk to and to learn from each other's experiences. So highly recommend that.
I've even had actually grandparents come for a session themselves, because one of them was like, so my kid, meaning the parents, were affirming and accepting of the child, and use their pronouns, use the name that they chose, and the grandparents were like, what is happening? And so I'm not sure what they thought they were getting from an affirmative therapist, but it ended up working out really well, where I was able to play, like, assign documentaries for them to watch, just some podcasts to listen to, things to sort of like dip their toes into the culture of today. And I've had a few others where, just their grandchild is changing genders, and to them it was like a whole new person, and that was, anxiety inducing. So we talk about that. We talk about how one grandma was like, how am I going to have Christmas? Like, how am I going to host Christmas? And that was a real thing. It was like, we took a lot of time, planning and prepping and establishing boundaries of, as long as your grandchild knows that she is supported and loved by you, and you're only going to have people at the table who love and support your grandchild, like, she's going to be okay, and you're going to be okay. And that was really helpful. But it was really like, it was a lot to break down, you know what I mean? All the different, I think I've had an aunt too, actually, like, so outside family members, which I think is interesting.
Yeah. And I do think, for the vast majority of LGBTQ kids that may just be gay or queer or questioning, you don't have to come out to anybody you don't want to. You don't need to let family know. It's the challenging situation for parents of transgender kids, where they cannot be called their dead name. They cannot be called the wrong gender, where you have to make headway with family and friends that are in your life, so that you're protecting them from that. And if you find that people aren't supportive or can't find a way to be, yes, refer them to PFLAG, refer them to any other resources. You care about this child, and if you want to be part of their life, you have to learn how to accept them for who they are. And so anyway,
that's a lot of what I do, sort of, once I've stabilized the family, is, I'm glad you brought up the dead name too, because some parents, some moms, I should say, really that term like cuts to their heart because it's just the word Jed's in it, I guess.
Yeah.
So it's navigating just the terminology and the what else? Oh, this is the dead name. One thing I usually I've actually learned from PFLAG, believe it or not, was when it comes to legally changing a child's name and or gender marker, if you're going that route, the most convenient time to do it is before they're getting their learner's permit. So you don't have to go and rechange, names on documents. But anytime you change a name, you still have to list your alias in certain government forms. So the idea that you're never going to see or hear this name again isn't really, that's not how we work
Yeah,
as
not
a
practical.
society. So it's like that sort of weirdly helps normalize it, you know what I mean? Just that it's not going away, but it's also who you are. And I also work on how to sort of reduce the physical symptoms of being either misgendered or dead named, and how you're surrounding yourself with people who's like, look at what you've done. You have a support system. You have people who know and love you for who you are. This person on the street here they don't know, or they're not a great person. And then you get to choose how you handle that situation, which is the walk away, defenders, so it's a lot of that stuff that you're
So for the
having.
people that are invested in you and know you and love you and care about you, even for them,
Mhm.
with the word like dead, as you say, it's a process. So it's
Oh,
about
yeah.
learning and educating and catching up
Mhm.
with their kids on, all right, this is how you feel. Now I have to get my arms around it and
Yeah.
figure it out and understand it. Yeah, horrible that stranger on the street is rude and negative. But the people that love you, let's focus on how do we get them understanding all about you.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And there,
especially kids on the spectrum too, actually, because a lot of them don't actually know whether the person's being sarcastic or not. So
Mhm.
they have a very hard time navigating. So we do a lot of role playing for that, just practicing videos, facial expressions, things like that.
Yeah. There is a certain amount of, grieving of what you had envisioned for your child that, but it's really important for you to work that through on your own with your own counselor and not put the burden of that on your child. Your child, you're blessed to have children in your life, and to learn ways to be supportive of them is so important, and not to make them feel shame or guilt or anything about them being who they are, which is a very brave and courageous thing, and important for them to do. And I think the other tip that I would say, I spoke at a panel at the library about efforts to quell a book in a middle school or late elementary book called The Pants Project, which featured a transgender student. And it was a really sweet, great book, but some parents had a problem with it. And I'm like, I so wish I had books like that in my house, or that my kids had read them in school, so that they could understand earlier and have the terminology and know that there are kids out there. So the earlier you can give kids access to this, I think the better. It doesn't make a kid change who they are. It supports the kids that are that in being comfortable with themselves. So really important.
I mean, there's so much information out there on the value of people seeing people like themselves, what that does to self-esteem, resilience, knowing there are people out there like you. And it doesn't make a kid trans to
Right.
read a trans book, and it doesn't make someone gay to know someone who's gay. And it's just so much education. But yeah. One other comment that was made, and it kind of speaks to the challenges we all face now of trying to find good clinical help, groups, therapists, psychologists, psychiatrists, social workers. There's a waiting list everywhere, insurance, and even with insurance, people are struggling finding these things. Someone asked, how do you get, or do you have any knowledge of programs that help clinicians be certified or become more knowledgeable about working with LGBTQ youth plus youth?
Yeah. So
programs out there, universities you'd suggest?
Yeah, Fairfield U has it used to be called gender minority, gender sexual identity minority mental health program. It was a certificate. It is a certificate that so you don't have to be at Fairfield U to attend. You can either be in Fairfield U enrolled in a master's program, or you can be in a different master's program, or just anything, and take the class. It's almost like an ECU kind of a thing, like extra educational credits.
Yeah, a separate certificate.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then the other one, I lost it. I forgot the other one.
I found it helpful to go to organizations that support LGBTQ youth, like Triangle Community Center, which accepted people on a sliding scale. And you didn't have to go through insurance if you didn't have, have it. I know Child Guidance Center has a gender diversity and resilience program that, I think would be great for anybody looking. We kept our counselor, even though they left TCC. We've followed them, and they now have their own affirmative care center, and but we're privileged. We have insurance, we have whatever, but I think going through these nonprofit organizations is a great way to find skilled people.
Yeah. So if some clinicians though also wanted to expand their practice and they're seeing more kids coming in needing this, there are some certification programs out there. I know some programs, even like Youth Mental Health First Aid has some LGBTQ plus components to their training.
Yeah, just the language, is important to know what the kids are saying these days. The other thing I was thinking too was, my God, it keeps going from my brain. This is why, because I'm here. Triangle Community Center has a training institute. So it doesn't offer like certifications or anything, but it will, we do work with public schools. We work with synagogues, like places of worship, companies, and I believe that's on a sliding scale also. I don't know how the invoicing works, but our program manager, I believe they are called now, they just got promoted. But Cadence, they run their program, and every staff member that intern that starts at TCC has to go through the LGBTQIA plus 101 education. I think there's a 102 now too, but so that helps.
They just did a training at my church too, for the staff at my church, which was great.
Oh yeah.
They just did one for the town of Wilton, and Phoebe and I attended it. It was outstanding, and I think it's a good place to start for professionals that want to get more information, for parents that want more information. It seems like things are changing and developing, and terminology can get overwhelming and can be scary, and people don't want to offend anyone. So I think that's it. I know Phoebe does a lot of education in schools with groups, GSAs and all too.
And I would say too, especially for folks who may have kids that they think might be transgender, that finding an endocrinologist that follows the WPATH standards, which is the global, I can't remember what it was called, world, I don't know, standards. It's basically standards of care for transgender individuals. So finding a good person to help them through that journey is really important.
WayPath is what we use. So I, as a clinician, write gender affirming letters for surgeries. I haven't really had to do HRT in a while, but because some places are actually for adults not requiring letters for HRT, but the WayPath is how we see if the individual fits the criteria for gender affirming care.
I think that global organization that you're referring to, Polly, is on our resources. I don't have it in front of me, but it's a great benchmark kind of, it's the gold standard that people can use. So if you're wanting for vetted, safe information, I've been told that that's
you can read the studies. And it's interesting because not the first one, but the 7th, we're on the 8th version now. And when I had first started graduated, it was the 7th, and it went from being 75 pages to 300.
Wow.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's complicated.
It sure is. And
Yeah.
and they were even talking about having what's the criteria for non-binary individuals who do want top surgery but don't want hormones. So,
Yeah.
you know, there's a lot. It's just the tip of the iceberg.
Mhm.
Tip of the iceberg. Well, as we're winding down here to our hour, I just want to give you each an opportunity to share a final tip for supportive parents and families that are worried about safety or mental health, or connecting their loved ones with the right services. If there's any go-to thought that you didn't get a chance to say yet that you'd want to, please do.
I would just say it gets better, you know, finding those resources, connecting your kids with them. You know, things just fall into place in a good way. Talking to other parents, if anybody is interested in the Stamford PFLAG chapter, which we're also planning to host some meetings in Greenwich as well, just email me at polyem@stanfordctpride.com. And, you know, it's a beautiful journey. It's not easy, but nothing worthwhile is easy, but it is a beautiful journey, and just love them. That's really all that matters.
Thank you, Polly. Thank you. Liz, Phoebe, any final thoughts?
Go ahead. I was just going to say basically kind of what Polly said. You know, meet your kids where they're at. You know, they might not be ready for you to lead the Pride Parade, and that's okay. I will say, if your child does come out to you, do not share that information with anyone else, including your partner, unless your partner happens to be like super stealth and be, you know, can act like they don't know. But it's pretty damaging, actually, for kids when the parent goes and tells the other parent, and especially if the other parent overreacts and reacts differently. So that's one common theme I've seen from literally in my own therapy room to adults, you know, recounting. So meet your kid where they're at, and always ask if you can say their identity, you know, like who they have to agree with you sharing their coming
Yes.
out. Does that make sense?
Yes, yes. And
Mhm.
people's reactions, not everybody's going to have the same opinion, even
Yes.
a two-parent household.
Mm-hmm.
They could be on different pages.
Oh yeah, they usually are.
Phoebe, any thoughts about it finally?
Yeah, I just want to thank everybody for being here and taking the time to think through some of these things. And just to remind everybody to have grace for yourselves. What we're talking about is battling many, many years and far and wide worldviews, cultural standards, systems that are telling us that heteronormativity and cisgenderedness is not just the way to be, but like the most successful thing you can do. So there is it's an uphill battle to unlearn these things, and one step at a time.
Yeah.
Oh,
Thank you,
totally.
Phoebe, for asking me to be on this panel too. I forgot to say that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, I thank you all for being on it, because I think I appreciate all your personal sharing, professional sharing, really, really valuable. And I appreciate all you're doing. Thank you so much.
Thank you for all that Kids in Crisis does. Very, very grateful for Lighthouse and everything it's done for my family and their friends as well.